Hedley. And the Faerie and the eternal family.
Did you write it? We use my computer.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've done 7 o'clock. It's on
So you just give it to you slideshow. Oh yeah, not there.
Okay, great. Before I start, I will say that I have some very sad news that Margaret Barker is seriously ill and she's being operated on at the moment in Addenbrooke's. So if you can keep her in your thoughts and prayers, that would be wonderful. So, while discussing his shaping influences, Goethe says the Neoplatonism is at its basis. The Hermetic, mystical, and Kabbalistic all contributed and constructed a world which looked sufficiently weird. Der Neuplatonismus lag zum Grunde, das Hermetische, Mystische, Kabbalistische gab auch seinen Beitrag her und so erbaut eine Welt, die seltsam genug aussah. In the first scene of Goethe's Faust, there's a striking image of the world as a divine garment. The garment is not the garb of the conventional transcendent deity of theism. The Erdgeist, the spirit, the world spirit, exclaims, so schaff ich am sausenden Webstuhl der Zeit und werke der Gottheit lebendiges Kleid. Thus I weave at time's scurrying loom and furnish the Godhead's living garment. So here the Erdgeist seems to represent the creative power of nature, or perhaps what Hegel considered the realisierende Vernunft, or actualizing reason, as opposed to the beobachtende Vernunft, observational reason. And certainly, though many critics have seen this idea as representing a neo-spinocistic dimension to Goethe's thought, Erdgeist seems to be used as a synonym by Goethe for the anima mundi, for the soul of the world. Now, there's already this link between the soul of the world and this feminine principle has already been discussed very eloquently by Professor Strozinski, and it was very interesting to note the emphasis, in Professor Strozinski's discussion of the seminal Ennead 3.8, which was a treatise of immense importance for German Romanticism. When Friedrich Kreutzer translated Plotinus into German, he translated Ennead 1.6 on beauty and Ennead 3.8 on nature contemplation on the one. And of course, he was struck by the similarities between contemporary Naturphilosophie and the idea of nature that he found in Plotinus. Now, the idea of nature teaching, I think, has an interesting tradition that we can see in the figure of lady philosophy in Boethius, in the consolation of philosophy, and indeed even in Dante. So the paradox of Beatrice, who is at the same time Bice, using the nickname for his girlfriend, and of course at the same time she is this quasi divine figure who's leading him to the heavenly realm. So I think in lady philosophy and in Beatrice in the Divine Comedy, we have aspects of this Jones would say schillende Figur, this rich and suggestive figure of this quasi-divine feminine, the sort of teacher and a leader. Now, of course, the Renaissance is a key moment in the transmission of these ideas, and of course, Botticelli's Primavera is a striking instance of this Renaissance tradition, and I'm sure there are those in the room who could explicate this paradigmatic painting with much greater expertise than I. What I want to do, though, is to simply highlight the centrality of this Christian Platonic, Neoplatonic background to one of the key poets of the later Renaissance in England, and that is Spencer. I once made a pilgrimage to Hilary Armstrong, and we were talking about the origins of the revival of Platonism in the 17th century. And the reason for our discussion was the lack of clear trajectories between Ficino and the 17th century Platonists, particularly those in Cambridge. There are, of course, certain links. There's Colet, and of course his relation to Ficino. There are various figures between Colet and Henry Moore and Cudworth, figures like Everard Digby and others. But nevertheless, that trajectory is very hard to trace. And one of the figures that Armstrong suggested was Spencer, that his view is that Spencer was absolutely central. And indeed, Henry Moore says quite explicitly that his father reading to him the Faerie Queen on those dark nights in the manor house of in Lincolnshire, where the young Henry was brought up, was decisive for his own paideia. So Spencer, but of course Spencer is part of this broader Renaissance reception, and another figure is who's significant, of course, is Shakespeare. Now there has been mention, if I remember correctly, of Apuleius already, and particularly the cult of Isis. So I wanted to draw to your attention this wonderful vision of the goddess that we have in the Golden Ass. And it was in this translation that Shakespeare was familiar with various other writers in the period. So behold, Lucius, I am come, thy weeping and prayers have moved me to succor thee. I am she that is the natural mother of all things, mistress and governess of all the elements, the initial progeny of worlds, chief of powers divine, queen of heaven, the principle of the gods celestial, the light of the goddesses. At my will, the planets of the air, the wholesome winds of the seas, and the silences of hell be deposed. My name, my divinity is adored throughout the world in diverse manners, in variable customs, and in many names. For the Phrygians called me the mother of the god, the Athenians Minerva, the Cyprians Venus, the Candians Diana, the Sicilians Proserpina, the Eleusinians Ceres, some Juno, others Bellona, other Hecate, principally the Ethiopians which dwell in the Orient, and the Egyptians which are excellent in all kinds of ancient doctrine, and by their proper ceremonies accustomed to worship me, do call me Queen Isis. Behold, I am come to take pity of thy fortune and tribulation. Behold, I am present to favour and aid thee. Leave off thy weeping and lamentation. Put away all thy sorrow. But behold, the healthful day which is ordained by my providence. Therefore be ready to attend to my commandment. This day which shall come after this night is dedicated to my service by an eternal religion. My priests and ministers do accustom after the tempest of the sea be ceased to offer in my name a new ship as the first fruit of my navigation. Now, many of you here will be familiar with the comic usage that Shakespeare puts to the imagery of the golden ass with Bottom and Titania. And here's a rather splendid depiction of Titania and Bottom in the Midsummer Night's Dream. And indeed, this is not the only instance of the Shakespeare's use and awareness of this Renaissance tradition, but one could argue, so I can't do that here, but that there's a notion of the redemptive feminine. It's a very strong element in those strange later plays of Shakespeare, so figures like Perdita and Hermione. But let me return to Spenser. I really just wanted to, as it were, have a divagation towards Shakespeare to convey the sense that this is part of this general Renaissance tradition. Spenser's Faerie Queen is, of course, to some extent devoted to the figure of Elizabeth. And here's the quotation in which he conceives the most excellent and glorious person of our most sovereign, the Queen, and her kingdom in fairyland. So that's a letter that he writes to Raleigh. So in a way, Spenser, of course, is using the historical figure, the figure who is reported to have said, I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too. Rather than any dishonour shall grow by me, I myself will take up arms. I will enter my royal blood. I myself will be your general judge and rewarder of your virtue in the field. So that's so the heroic female figure. And indeed, in Spenser, we have the key figure of Britomart, who's a female knight of chastity, who is, as I say, destined to give birth to the British nation. And then there's also Phoebe, the huntress, who expresses the part of Elizabeth that is a most virtuous and beautiful lady. So in this age of gender fluidity, and where now you can't even in my own college, or find it difficult to go into a laboratory for men without having some sort of pansexual laboratory or something. The Renaissance tradition, of course, is full of sort of gender ambiguity, and in fact, this theme of the hermaphrodite is a very powerful theme in this Spencerian context, and these ambiguous female figures who have these male and female aspects is a central aspect of the poetry of Spenser. And not just Spenser, but of course a later Spencerian, John Milton. So Milton, of course, is in a way in a tradition of Spencerians alongside his younger contemporary Henry Moore. So Henry Moore's first work was poetry. So the Psychozoa is a Spencerian, anti-Lucretian philosophical poem. But Milton is also the inheritor of a certain Spencerian tradition. And I'll give you, first of all, this quotation from his Tetrachordon. God himself conceals us not his own recreations before the world was built. I was, saith the eternal wisdom, daily his delight, playing always before him, where Milton uses the verb playing rather than rejoicing, as in the King James or the Geneva text to translate Proverbs 8:30. And of course, many of you will be familiar with the wonderful passage in Book 7 in Paradise Lost. Descend from heaven, Urania, by that name, if rightly thou art called, whose voice divine following above the Olympian hill I saw, above the flight of Pegasian wing, the meaning, not the name I call, for thou, nor of the Muses nine, nor on the top of old Olympus dwellest, but heavenly born, before the hills appeared or fountain flowed, thou with eternal wisdom didst converse, wisdom thy sister, and with her didst play, in the presence of the Almighty Father, pleased with thy celestial song. Upled by thee into the heaven of heavens, I have presumed an earthly guest, and drawn imperial air, thy tempering, with like safety guided down, return me to my native element, lest from this flying steed unreined as once Bellerophon, though from a lower clime dismounted, on the Elean field I fall, erroneous there to wander and forlorn. So here in this passage we have this extraordinary appeal to the eternal wisdom who didst play in the presence of the Almighty Father. So we've mentioned the figure of Beatrice, who's not just the Gentilissima and Benedetta, but is this cosmic principle, this guide to deliverance, very much in the tradition of the Lady Wisdom in the Consolation of Philosophy. One might even say that the Renaissance itself starts with a feminine figure in Petrarch's site of Laura on April the 6th, 1327, in the church of Saint Clair in Avignon. We've also already heard about the Kabbalistic Zohar, where the Shekinah is the God's bride, and where the relationship between God and the Shekinah is presented in frankly erotic terms. And this is extremely important for Goethe. As we have seen, he tells us that in his upbringing in Frankfurt, there was a very strong Neoplatonic, Kabbalistic, Hermetic context which he grew up with, and that's the background to the lines in Faust. All fleeting things are just an image. The imperishable is here an event. The indescribable is thus done. The eternal feminine draws us upwards. Alles Vergängliche ist nur ein Gleichnis. Das Unvergängliche, hier wird's Ereignis. Das Unbeschreibliche, hier ist es getan. Das ewig Weibliche zieht uns hinan. Robert J. Richards, in Romantic Conception of Life, Science and Philosophy in the Age of Goethe, notes of the Olympian German bard that the female became for him the symbol of creativity, of the generative power of the artist and of nature, and in her embrace, Goethe's poetry was joined to his science. And Goethe wasn't alone in this. Novalis, Franz von Baader, Joseph Goebbels were all fascinated by male and female polarity in both nature and mythology. So Novalis, 1772 to 1801, in his 6 hymns to the night, presents death as a mysterious path to mystical union with divine love. And in a third of his hymns to the night, Novalis describes the vision at the grave of his beloved fiancée, Sophie von Kuhn, and she is identified with Christ. The antipathy, quote, between light and shadow, the yearning for clear, hot, penetrating ether, the unknown holy, the Vesper and Sophia, this is the way to look upon my fairy tale, end of quotation. So that's from Novalis's hymns to the night. And the fascination with the Orient in this period, particularly India, but also Persia, would have reinforced this. So this principle of male and female polarity is absolutely central, at least for Goethe and Baader, but also for Kreutzer, the translator of Plotinus, among other things, and the author of the Symbolik und Mythologie der alten Völker, so symbolism and mythology of the ancient people. Now, I want to conclude with the way in which this Goethean fascination with the eternal feminine is developed by Schelling in the light of Burma. So Novalis's words are really drawing on this vision of the divine Sophia in Burma, where he has a veneration of the, quote, especially lovely, heavenly, pure maiden and goddess of the spirit, who he identifies with the Virgin Mary. This is rather ironic that a Lutheran theologian should be so fascinated by the Virgin Mary, but there we are. The idea of wisdom bridges the logos of revelation with the logos of creation. And characteristic for Burma, the relationship to the light of Sophia and the fire of the soul is dialectical. Not only does the soul need the light of heavenly wisdom, but divine Sophia needs the fire of the soul. So this is Burma. O noble bridegroom, keep your face before me and give me your fire beams. Lead your desire into me and ignite me. By my meekness, I shall then change your fire beams into a white light and direct my love through your fire beams into your fire's essence. I shall kiss you eternally. In her comprehensive narrative, Goddesses and the Divine Feminine, Rosemary Radford Reuter notes the vision of this Sophia as this feminine dimension of the divine flowing from Burma into 19th century European thought. And then the decisive middle period of his philosophy, the unfinished Weltalter, Schelling draws explicitly on Boehmer's doctrine of the cosmic Sophia and wisdom, and he paraphrases the momentous passage from Proverbs about wisdom playing at the dawn of creation. Indeed, interestingly, in terms of the so-called Orientalism of the period, he actually refers to the Indian or Sanskrit notion of Leela. So this is the passage from the Weltautor, from the Ages of the World. This playful zest, die spielende Lust, in the emerging life of God was recognized by the ancients, who expressively called it wisdom, an unspotted mirror of divine vitality. Here we've got the mirror imagery that Mark Edwards was talking about earlier, the biblical, of course, source. And because of the passively suffering qualities that emergent being has taken upon itself in being an image of its good-heartedness, the Lord had me by his side from the beginning of his path. Before he had made a thing, I was already there. I was already from eternity before the earth, before the mountains had settled in and the fountains flowed with water. I was the master worker, der Werkmeister, by his side. Every day brought pleasure to me, hatte meine Lust, and I always played happily before him. So Schelling in this work presents a process of divine unfolding or self-realization in stages of world history. In opposition to the top-down metaphysics of classical theistic metaphysics, Neoplatonic or scholastic, the God of Schelling's middle period is an evolutionary deity. But the vision of Schelling is also opposed to any crude identification of God with nature or mechanistic reductionism. Through the world soul, the soul has its ectype in an external spiritual corporeal being, the first actual existence of God. Schelling's Ages of the World remained an unfinished fragment, and despite Schelling's reluctance to publish after 1809, the influence of the middle and later phase of Schelling's thought was momentous in Russia. So the Russian Vladimir Solovyov is, after Boehm and Schelling, perhaps the most significant proponent of a cosmic wisdom. While avoiding some of the more radical and enigmatic aspects of Schelling's evolutionary theogony, Solovyov became a pivotal figure in combining the world soul and Sophia speculation that's fused in the thought of German Protestant mysticism, especially Boehmer, and then later Schelling. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this friend of Dostoevsky was deeply familiar with Boehmer and Schelling and drew upon the same Christian Neoplatonic sources with reference to the world soul and to Sophia. Kabbalah, Neoplatonism, Boehmer and Swedenborg, Schelling and me. That's the quotation from Then he reported, of course, 3 visions of the divine wisdom in Moscow, London, and a hazardous trip to Israel, to Egypt. In London, he studied late antique medieval European Kabbalah and Indian thought, and he was fascinated by both concepts of the world soul and divine wisdom, and on occasion explicitly identifies them. Sophia is, quote, a universally human organism as the eternal body of God and the eternal soul of the world. So I think we can see that this image of the Sophia, this notion of wisdom, has had quite a remarkable trajectory in Western thought, if not always an uncontroversial trajectory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions, please?
I have a lot of problems with the invocations in Milton's Paradise Lost and whether there's any real theology behind them. I mean, supposedly Milton has this very austere and systematic biblical theology, of course, in the De Doctrina. But I mean, in book 1, we've got an invocation to the sacred muse,
Yes.
which is then clearly distinguished from the Holy Spirit. And in book 3, we've got an invocation to light, which arguably is not the second person of the Trinity, since it's co-eternal and strictly God, which the second person of the Trinity may not be for Milton. And then in book 7, we've got this invocation of Urania, who is strictly distinguished from wisdom because she's the sister, well, wisdom is Urania's sister. So, I mean, I suppose the first thing I wonder is there any real theology underlying all these florid prologues? If there is there any connection between Urania and Plato's Uranian Aphrodite, or any of the forms of love and Aphrodite that you find in the Symposium?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously the Paradise Lost is a poetic, imaginative endeavor, but Milton is clearly operating within this late Renaissance scheme, and so I think it's and the other aspect that's important here, which I didn't mention, I mentioned actually over lunch, but I didn't mention it in my talk, was the extraordinary significance of Milton for the early Romantics. So he was an absolutely pivotal source until he was replaced by Shakespeare. So my claim would be that in Milton we have a reception, however one judges that theologically in terms of its relative orthodoxy or heterodoxy, a reception of this notion of a divine wisdom, which he shares with Spencer, linked often to various feminine goddesses as part of this sort of syncretistic Renaissance fusion of Christian and pagan themes. And that had its, because of his pivotal figure, I mean, a pivotal role in European culture. And obviously Spencer did not have the European influence that Milton had. I mean, Milton, so even though Milton is, let's say, a rather diminished Spencerian, you don't have this extremely exuberant Neoplatonic allegorizing that you have in Spencer. But nevertheless, there's, one might say, a residue of it in Milton that comes up in these significant passages, and that this was immensely significant for European Romanticism because of this pivotal role of Milton.
Thank you. From Milton not to Goethe, I really think that the linchpin of your paper, Professor Hedley, was the Goethe, and we went over it quite quickly to get to other figures for whom I have a certain admiration, you know, Schelling and company. Yeah. But this moment that you quoted at the end of Faust Part 2, which is a baffling book. Yeah. But you have that moment which is called the mystical chorus. This is Das ewige Weiblichkeit zieht uns hinein. And Faust, if I recall correctly, any Germanists in the room can correct me, but Faust's body has been rent from Mephistopheles, or his soul rather, rent from Mephistopheles, and is being brought up to three holy biblical women. So you've got Mary of Egypt, you've got the Samaritan woman, you've got somebody else, I can't remember. And somewhere in there, there's an evocation of the Veil of Isis. And so this goes back to what you're saying about Spencer, Isis,
yes,
nature's secrets. It's also the three graces. It's also the Virgin Mary, because you have at least one Mary there, and then you have this kind of, you know, ewige Weiblichkeit, kind of almost Catholic moment in Goethe. So you have all that.
But it's weird, isn't it? I mean, it's like just to interject, all these Protestants being fascinated by this quasi-Marian figure, right? I mean, Goethe, Böhme, I mean, Schelling, they're all, I mean, it's easier to understand why Solovyov but why would these Protestants be so, and indeed Milton, right? I mean, obviously,
Because Burma's not aspiring to orthodoxy, is he? Whereas at least in the case, in Spencer and Milton, it's in both Puritans, of course, it's
Yeah.
not.
I'm not an expert on Luther, but I think Luther was, what he was against was the veneration of Mary, while in his theology he clearly accepted the Theotokos
I guess that's-
status of
yeah.
Mary. And I read at least about the Reformation and the Central Eastern Europe that, for instance, when Calvinists came and started to destroy the figures of Mary, some Lutherans would defend
Yes.
Mary against the Calvinists. So it depends on.
No, exactly, yes.
I mean, it
Obviously.
depends on so many complex
Absolutely.
conditions.
But nevertheless, I think it's, I mean, if you're looking in terms of I think, obviously, this was a very broad sketch that I was giving, but part of it is just the observation that we have a stress upon this divine feminine in a sort of broadly Platonic tradition, which is, I think, quite intriguing, and that so you find these Puritan Protestant writers dwelling on this rather surprising feminine aspect of the divine. And then it comes through into the Romantic age, where this is really full blown, that the polarity of male and female is the key to the whole of the cosmos, and and then you have these paeans to these encomiums of the feminine in Goethe and Novalis, and
Thank you. The width of your study was to bring us from ancient times to modern times, from the Golden Ass to Goethe. That was wonderful. Thank you.
well, I was really just wanting to draw a few threads together, because we'd had a number of extremely expert papers, so I was simply giving you.
When we were talking about the Virgin Mary or the Mother of God, I keep thinking about what Professor Edwards, I think, was saying in his paper, namely that this divine figure of holy wisdom, of the wisdom of God, it somehow seems to be connected in the tradition with protection or protecting Israel or certain figures in dangerous situations. You said something, but I think it's very interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting when you look at the all sorts of miracles reported throughout history, where Mary saved Constantinople from the siege, the Battle of Lepanto, of course, is saving Europe from Islam, and then of course in the Polish tradition, it's very strong figure of Mary as this almost a warrior protecting Poland from the Soviets and the Swedes, and so I think this is either a Jungian archetype or a continuous tradition. Certain motives, themes, they keep coming back, even though we cannot really find the trajectory, textual trajectory for those themes.
And of course, it's often said that Marian devotion in the Elizabethan era was focused on Elizabeth herself.
Yes. She's as a sort of replacement in Mary.
Yeah, the Virgin Queen, who in a sense is also a great prince, also a king, so she has that masculinity of the Virgin.
Yeah.
And T.S. Eliot's four quartets, I don't remember which one, there is this, he quotes Dante, Filia del Filio, protect those who are on the sea. I mean, he invokes the image of the sea, of course, as the chaos and the danger, and Mary is this saving figure for Eliot, was an Anglican, of course, not a Catholic.
But I mean, there's also the notion of wisdom is linked to harmony, which is one who brings harmony.
Because this comes from the Proverbs, attingens a fine usque finem fortiter suaviter quod disponens omnias. So strongly and sweetly, it brings order to all things.
Yeah.
Any other question?
Perhaps it is a blasphemy from what I share.
Don't worry,
But it's that at the in this final part of Faust, there is a struggle between the sorrow of Faust and the mind of Mephistopheles. So Tibet, sorrow, Faust and sorrow, and Nous, Mephistophelian intellect. And Faust is attracted by the eternal family, that's aided by belief. On the other hand, Mephistopheles is attracted in the first moment by the eternal emptiness, so that's Eric Lair.
Yeah.
But at the end, by the masculine forms of the angels, Swapiti, these masculine angels. So an eternal masculine or masculinity for the Mephistophelian mind. On the contrary, this eternal feminine for the sour Faust, human.
I don't need to be pedantic, but I think that in the last scene of Faust, there are female figures and Mephistopheles is lusting after them.
But masculine forms of angels, I remember.
It's such a strange text, we have to look at that.
It looks as if they were pretty boys. Rather.
Pretty boys?
Yes,
Mephistopheles
there
is
is.
lusting after something.
Yeah, I think there is a homosexual
Yeah, okay.
dimension to it.
yes, I can't really comment, I'm afraid.
I just want to add a small companion to the poem you read about the keys of the presence. So there is this beautiful image in the Zohar and in the Zoharic tradition where the mystic should be kissed, and it's called the kiss of the death, kissed by the presence of God, which is the Shekinah. And it happens on Shabbat precisely if they keep the Shabbat. So I just find very surprising the parallel. That was just a comment.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I mean, one element that's very important here in the background is the Kabbalah reception, and that's again an interesting link. Not that I want to go into too much self advertising, but for the Cambridge Platonists and the new anthology on the Cambridge Platonists that we've just produced with Christian Hengstemann, where we've I think tried to establish the significance of the Cambridge Platonists for this for Goethe and for the German Romantics and Idealists. And one of the reasons for this is, well, you could say there are two. One is through the patristic tradition. So because Cudworth was translated by Morsheim, and then so Cudworth's Two Intellectual System becomes this textbook that you had to read if you were a young theologian in Tübingen, like Hegel or Schelling, or Jena. And then the other was through Moore and Moore's critique of Burma, Kabbalah, and Spinoza. So you get this fusion of Burma, Kabbalah, and Spinoza, which is not the most, if you pick up the ethics and compare Spinoza's ethics with either Burma or the Kabbalah, then what is going on? But Moore, in his opera Omnia, sets them up as all suffering from basically the same problem. Then his critique and discussion is included by Christian Knorr von Rosenholt, the Gershom Scholem of the late 17th, 18th century, in his Kabbalah Denudata. And so that through the Kabbalah Denudata, you get this reception of Moore going up to Lessing, Jacobi, and obviously the German idealists. So you the Kabbalah, in fact, is a very important part of the revival of Spinoza, the discussion of Spinoza in the late 18th century, and a surprisingly important part of that milieu in Germany, as it is in the age of the Cambridge Platonists, where Lady Anne Conway is a sort of Kabbalist, and part of the reason for that is that Franziskus Mercurius von Helmont and Christian Knorr von Rosenroth are discussing these matters with her, and she, like many others at the time, saw the Kabbalah as a way of unifying Christians and Jews. So I think the parallel is not at all surprising in this very syncretistic context. And of course, for Cudworth, like a Reuchlin, right? So he thinks Pythagoras is Jewish. So,
Well, thank you.